particular video, I will be doing an in-depth analysis on the rise of personality orientations, and I will be doing so in an explanation by comparing it now to a scientific process such as magnetism. The reason I'll be using a scientific process in order to essentially explain how these processes work in the creation of your personality and orientation through the analysis based around magnetism, for one, because it's a very easily understandable model, but also because I'm using a scientific way of explaining this rather than a religious perspective, as we are now seen speaking or inviting religion when speaking regarding personality and orientation has now been made illegal. So in the invitation of using scientific terms, might we see that be made illegal too? Well, I don't know. Let's find out. In the understanding of personality, you might find that you are yourself a bit more like one parent than the other, just like you're like the other more than the other. In your own self, you're essentially created through a magnetizing process. Imagine polar energies for a second, positive and negative. But what happens when you take two of these particular forces now, and you have a positive, negative, well, it creates a binding. And through this binding, you now create a new one, you could say. And through this magnetizing binding, well, the new one essentially is a new magnet, a new field of life. Now the question arises, what is this magnet's polarity, male or female? Because even in the binding process, where we now see the orientations rise, you could essentially find that even in the combinations of the two initial polar binding magnetizing forces, such as the parents, beyond the creation of the new one based on polar opposites attract, right? Beyond the creation of the new one, you might see now that, if you may see, polar opposites creating this binding, right? The new one. But now if you were to flip the pole, you might see towards said child a different relationship. If one parent shifts their polar energy towards not just the parent, it also shifts towards not just their partner, towards their child as well. What might be creating these polar energetic shifts within said each individual? From a partner level, you could find that a great influence to you in your life is your parents. In the relationships you have with your parents, you might find you then project said issues towards your current relationships that you could then see reflected not just in your partner, but then towards your child as well. So, from taking two polar opposites, creating a binding, a new one, in the rise of their personality, which then results in their orientation, according to how the child itself polar flips in its attraction towards its parent. And in its attraction, you would say its likeness, learning to learn how to perceive love. And in learning to learn how to perceive love in said parent's eyes, in its binding, you might find an orientation begin to arise within said child, a way that it recognizes love. And in the way it recognizes love is according to the way it recognizes love in its parents' eyes. You could argue that from these polar opposites creating a binding, now resulting in a one, according to which way all of a sudden the child orients itself, you would find the parent might orient itself that particular way too, towards the child to create its development. But the moment a parent shifts now towards its child and away from the partner, you then see that there's one partner that is left, well, you could say, not matched. And so then the idea of replication would be to create more and more equal matches known as a family, where the foundations of this magnetic energy, where the foundations of this magnetic energy create a more stable foundation. But resulting back now in the simple being that is created from the two polar opposites and a new one. What happens when you turn and it creates the same energy? When two polar opposites are of the same pole in the development of said personality, of said orientation, what happens when there is a rejecting force between not just both partners, but both partners towards the child at all times? Well, you could say that individual is confused. It is continuously in motion. It would create spin. And in this particular individual, which I'm not going to name, we can all assume the individuals that I'm speaking of. We can actively find that there is actually a way to say that these individuals scientifically do exist, based on the magnetizing energy model. But you might say, well, we are more than just magnets. You're right. We are life beings. And yet we are not treating life as life. And so, in terms of putting a blame for the children affected in all of this, and I'm speaking now of the children that are alive in everyone, including myself. Because all we are is just a child that's grown into an adult. But in the way we are developed throughout our life, you might see a genetic pattern And in these genetic patterns, you would essentially find the written histories of life from each previous ancestor. And this story is often manifested in the next generation's behavioral patterns. They reenact essentially the way they were brought up, the same way their parents reenacted the way they were brought up, and it goes on and on and on. Which ultimately leads now to this magnetizing energy, which is continuously either shifting in your mating, or it is sit still in its binding, whichever way the attraction is created, resulting in separate orientations and a middle sex, if you wish, according to the orientations of the magnetizing energies that which the parents then create. And then you might argue, well, that's a horrible thing to say. You know, the understanding that most people would say that, yes, the idea of your orientation is not a choice. It's how you are raised, whether it be consciously or subconsciously put forth by your parents. But I would argue for a parent to say that the moment they look upon their child's face at birth and they say, I knew right then and there that little Billy was gay, that's not the child's perspective, that's the parents pushing of their own personal self-agenda towards the raising of their particular child at that particular point. The point I'm trying to make is, in terms of the individual personalities and orientations that which you might find present in life today, you can base these according to the magnetizing energies that which either create a binding, and in said binding, now when you raise said child, according to how your energies shift in between parents as partners, those energies also affect how particular child reacts in its binding or attraction to said parent or sex, you could say. Whether it be of same sex, opposite sex, or experience a rejection from both. And through these combinations, you can find infinite possible creations of personality, infinite possible creations of orientation. The point that I now ask you as a viewer is, at which point do you see that it is morally acceptable to allow, I would say, let's put the children aside here, which are the people of here today. let's put the parents on the pedestal for a second. Do you think it's morally wrong to have parents reject their children? I think we could all argue that that is a yes. But the question arises, even once the children are rejected, now said society rejects them too. And so in the question itself, regarding self-identity, who are you? That is a lifelong question that is never answered. Because that is an ongoing story. And in the discovering of self, I invite you to live your life. Thank you.